World News Today, brought to you by Continental Radio and Television Corporation, makers of Admiral Radio, America's smart set. By shortwave broadcast, direct from important overseas stations, as well as the leading news centers of our own country, CBS correspondents are waiting to bring you a complete report from the world's political and battlefronts.
Clear now that the Russians look for more than the lifting of the siege of Stalingrad. They're out to smash the German armies, widen breaches gouged out of the German lines, and continued its advance against stubborn resistance. How deep the penetration is was not stated in the noon communique. 10,000 Germans have been killed and 5 Nazi divisions routed. Perhaps even more important, 2 vital German supply lines in the area have been cut. Meanwhile, at Stalingrad, the Russians continue to advance northwest and southwest of the city. Although the noon communique gave little detail, it did say that in the past 24 hours, another 2,300 Nazis were killed on 2 sectors northwest of Stalingrad, and 64 Axis planes were shot down.
The great Russian offensive, which Premier Stalin originally planned to drive the Germans out of Russia this year, is now taking place. But it's taking place later in the year than Stalin planned. Last May 1st, you remember, he ordered the Red Army to push the invaders out of Russia in 1942. At that time, he was thinking in terms of a United Nations second front in Europe this year. But a lot of unexpected things happened last summer while I was in Russia. The Russians had become overconfident. They didn't expect the great German surge across the Don. But although Russia used up some of her best divisions in the defense of Stalingrad, the Soviet Union was not compelled to expend her mighty reserve armies. They remained fresh and intact. Now she's throwing them into the battle. But we must not forget that the great German armies holding the line in central and north Russia have seen little action this summer. They are still immensely strong. The first stage of the Russian offensive around Stalingrad is completed. The next phase will take longer. The German army trapped on the open plain between the Don and the Volga must be exterminated. This could take a short time if the Germans were inclined to surrender. But Germans rarely surrender as long as they have food, ammunition, and shelter. But that's exactly what they will not have on the bleak steppes. Here there are no trees for firewood, and the iron-cold winds from Siberia pile the Russian snow 10 feet deep. If the Germans could supply this army by transport plane, they could, conceivably, pull through. But Germany's great weakness lies in her overworked air force. The Germans will undoubtedly try to break their way through this Russian ring.
In Russia, in the Middle Don offensive, the Red Army is sweeping westward at a speed comparable to the Nazi advance eastward last July. They have taken Katamarovka, only 55 miles north of Milerovo, and now threaten the entire railway line from Voronezh to Milerovo. Milerovo is a junction point of the Moscow-Rostov Railroad. It has already been cut. In Russian hands, it can and probably will be the base of a Russian offensive south to retake Rostov and smash or trap the entire German force in the great Stalingrad salient. Once again, the Russians report that they have taken thousands of German prisoners, this time well over 10,000. That fact alone is extremely significant. It's unlikely that the Russians want to take any German prisoners and will not if any semblance of resistance is offered. The thousands of Nazis that are falling into Russian hands confirm earlier Russian reports that German troops are surrendering wholesale and that the morale of the Nazi army in Russia has deteriorated. About a year ago today, Hitler, with a great deal of fanfare, took over supreme command of the German armies. The best Christmas gift the United Nations could receive is the assurance that he will not relinquish that command. As the new Russian offensive hammers and tears chunks out of the Germans, dispatches said that everywhere along the long Russian front, the Nazis are either in retreat, surrounded, or menaced on the flank. That perhaps is a bit on the optimistic side, but the Russians are holding on to what they've gained in the offensives at Stalingrad and west of Moscow. And although the Nazis have been reinforced and have launched vicious counterattacks, they have not been able to relieve the desperation of their position. Russia has regained 65,000 square miles of Soviet soil so far in the winter offensives. If the new Middle Don offensive maintains its momentum, it will probably force a general Nazi withdrawal that will finally lift the siege of Stalingrad.